So, firstly, thank you very much for the positive feedback and comments you've given regarding the first episode of the Handicap Movers and Shakers. As I mentioned yesterday, the second video I'm keen to do is a piece I'm going to call from the Stewards room. It's not going to be a naughty boys and naughty girls list for riding infringements and that sort of thing, but I often, pretty much every evening, will look and just see if there's any interesting explanations given for poor performances or even improved performances. Stewards will often ask connections to account for a run, and equally, jockeys and trainers are encouraged to report to the clerk of the scales if they think there's a valid reason for a horse's below par run, etc. So I've pulled a few from the last week that I think are interesting for various different reasons, and we'll get on with it. The first one comes from Doncaster on January the 28th, and it was the 240. It's quite a simple one, this. Just a little note at the bottom of the Stewards report to say that the veterinary officer reported that Twig, who was placed sixth, was showing signs of heat stress. Twig is a horse I really like. I followed him, and he's actually done me quite well this year, and I expected him to show up quite well in this race, albeit he was slightly up in grade. But he was well beaten, 28 lengths. I've looked back through his form. It's never before been reported that he suffered from heat stress, so this seems like it's a one-off thing. And I think, it's reasonable to think that that can contribute to a below-par performance. He nearly featured in yesterday's piece in that he's been dropped £2 by the handicapper. Given that there's a valid excuse for this run, he's on a mark now of 130 over hurdles. It's 134 over fences. I think that's a workable mark. When he enters handicap hurdles, he's a bit of a quirky ride, and I think actually handicaps might even see this horse in better light, where they'll go hard early on, and races can often fall apart. I think that'll suit him. So Twig is on my radar. I think you can put a line through his run at Doncaster in the 240 on January the 28th. The next one also comes from the 28th of January from Uttoxeter, the 12:15. This is a slightly more lengthy process, and I'm going to read the full report because I think it's quite interesting for a number of reasons. So an inquiry was held, the 12:15 at Uttoxeter, this is, I should say, an inquiry was held into the running and riding of Fazate, ridden by Finn Lambert and trained by Ryan Potter, which raced in the rear throughout before being ridden conservatively in the home straight until after the final flight to finish second, beaten 13 lengths. The rider stated his instructions were to drop the gelding in, gradually creep into the race, and allow Fazate to make his challenge coming through horses. He added that there was no early pace, and he was happy with how the gelding settled and travelled. However, when the pace quickened down the back straight, Fazate did not immediately respond, and furthermore became unbalanced in the tacky ground once round in the final bend. So he elected to hold him together and follow the favourite Bobby Socks into the home straight. He went on to explain that as that horse faded, he had to switch left for a clear run and was then further encumbered by Rob Royal. Once getting a clear run, he was able to ride more strongly, but the winner had already got first run, and he believed he had achieved the best possible placing in the circumstance. The trainer's representative confirmed those instructions and believed that the ride had followed those instructions, and the stewards noted their explanation. I think watching the race, it's clear that Fazate was not given an optimal ride. Now, it's for you to draw your own conclusion whether that was slightly deliberately in that he perhaps wasn't intending on putting his best foot forward in this occasion, as does happen in handicap racing. Now, you either like it or you don't. Personally, I quite enjoy the added element of trying to find in these handicaps horses that are perhaps going to be seen to better effect for the application of money, should we see. Now, Ryan Potter is a very shrewd, very capable trainer, and often his horses are well supported in the market. Fazate was fairly weak in the market in a race where he probably had a reasonable chance. And when you look back at his form, yes, he's often dropped in, but it's normally at the back of mid-division. So whether Finn Lambert has perhaps over-exaggerated the tactics here, Finn Lambert's a young jockey learning his trade. It's perfectly reasonable that he could make errors like that. But I think Fazate certainly wasn't positioned to best effect off, as they described it, a slow pace. It's a horse I followed anyway because 2 runs ago he was beaten just half a length by a horse called Accidental Legend, and he was given Accidental Legend £1. Now, I actually own the aunt of Accidental Legend, so I follow him quite carefully. He's a really strong stayer. He's running over 2.5 miles. He's going to be even better over 3. And I thought that was a good run from Fazate. Accidental Legend actually won yesterday on Wednesday off a mark of 100 by 6 lengths quite comfortably at Leicester. I think it's reasonable to think he's going to go up 4, 5, maybe even a few more pound. So Fazate's on a mark of 103. I think this run at Uttoxeter, where he's beaten 13 lengths, doesn't give the full story. I think this mark of 103 is still workable, and as such, he's still in my notebook as a horse to follow. The next horse comes on January the 28th, and it's in the 1:15 at Southwell. Again, a slightly different one. Prior to the race, trainer David Dennis, the trainer of Flying Verse, reported that he'd been unable to fit the tongue tie and the gelding would be running without it. So first, I think we have to explain what a tongue tie is and what it does. A tongue tie is normally a piece of stocking is often used, and it's tied in a loop over the horse's tongue and then tied in a bow to the lower jaw of the horse's mouth, designed to keep the tongue stable and flat to the bottom of their mouth. Horses can often lift their tongue when they're racing, and that can sort of inhibit the flow of air down the lungs, and it can obviously compromise performance. So horses are often fitted with a tongue tie to aid their breathing. You often see them combined with a wind-up, adding a tongue tie. It's been a regular piece of kit for Flying Verse. His last 3 runs have come in a tongue tie, and he ran pretty well at Southwell. He finished 3rd, but he perhaps finished slightly weakly, or more weakly than you would expect, given that he's got form over further. This was over 3 mile 2. He's won over 3 mile 7 and run well over extreme distances. So it's reasonable to think that he might have finished more strongly. If the loss of the tongue tie meant that his breathing was in some way compromised, I think that's a reasonable explanation for why he might have finished a bit weakly. And as such, it's another horse who's run when not winning and only placing. I can put a line through that. I've got a note now that he didn't have the tongue tie on, and if it's refitted next time, that might be a positive. It's a slight concern that a trainer as experienced David Dennis couldn't fit it. It's a tricky job tying a tongue tie on. You've got to stabilize their tongue, which is slippery and pretty strong, and then attach it securely to the bottom jaw. So it might be that Flying Verse is not enjoying having that done anymore, making things complicated. So it's probably something to watch out for next time. Hope they can get the tongue tie on. If they do, he's probably still on a decent mark. Also at Southwell in the 1:50, the stewards looked into the performance of Monty Agildo, which started second favourite and pulled up after just the 5th fence. The run was considered, and the representative of Oliver Greenall and Josh Guerrero, the trainers, could offer no explanation for the poor performance, other than that Henry Brooke, the jockey, reported that the gelding was never travelling and felt amiss, so he felt it prudent to pull him up. The veterinary officer conducted an examination after the race, some 20 minutes after the race, and said that he found the gelding to have an unusually high heart rate, considering he'd been pulled up just after 5 fences. Again, the reason for that high heart rate is, it can be many reasons, but I think it's another horse that's run poorly, and there's a perfectly reasonable explanation offered to the stewards as to why that poor run has happened. I can happily put a line through that run, and in the right race, in the right circumstances, he's still a horse that I would happily consider backing. And then the final one comes on the 30th of January from Huntingdon at 4 o'clock, where the performance of Largy Knights, which started second favourite and pulled up, was considered. Charlie Longston's representative could offer no explanation for the poor performance, other than to report that the jockey said he jumped slowly on a few occasions and never travelled thereafter. Again, the veterinary officer was involved here, and he reported that a post-race examination of Largy Knights revealed that the gelding finished lame on his left hind leg. Now, horses are rear-wheel drive, effectively. They get their power from their hind leg. They're propelled forward by their hind leg. And of course, that hind leg is exceptionally important in jumping. So again, it's another explanation that ties in with a poor performance. If a horse was sore behind, he's certainly not going to be jumping to his best effect. He's certainly not going to be galloping out to his best effect. Now, whether that injury is serious or minor. It can be as minor as a pulled muscle, and it obviously can then range up to more serious things. But again, it's another horse that's performed poorly when favourite, but a perfectly reasonable explanation has been offered. And again, as such, he's on my list. I'd have no problem backing him next time. Because obviously before he goes to the races, Charlie Longston is going to have done a full MOT, going to have got to the bottom of why the horse was lame and remedied it. So that's a wrap up of a slightly shorter video, the first of the from the Stewards room. I'll do these every week. If there's anything you spot and you want me to have a look at, then maybe drop me a tweet or drop a message in the comments below, and we'll take a look at it next week. Finally, just to clarify something, a few people have asked whether this is going to evolve into a subscription-only service. I can categorically say that will not be the case ever. It's just something I'm interested to do, enjoying. I would like to build a bit of a platform where I can perhaps explain a few of the nuances of racing a little bit more clearly, as I think sometimes things can slip through the net. So no, it'll never be a subscription service. If you want to help, the best thing you can do is to subscribe, like this video, share it to anyone you think might be interested, and get involved in the comments, and let's try and build it into something that's interesting for all of us and hopefully helpful to some of us. So until next week, thanks very much, and I'll be back next Tuesday with a handicap movers and shakers, and again on Wednesday with another piece of From the Stewards Room.